Every abandoned building and location in the world contains a mystery. What used to happen in this place? Why did it become abandoned? And what happened to the people who used to come here? Stories like this fascinate us, and we know that they fascinate you too. That's why we're always happy to bring you incredible stories about abandoned places on this channel. And this video features some of the best we've ever seen. Our journey begins in the forests just outside Moscow, the capital city of Russia. Here, we find an enormous abandoned complex hiding among the trees. This building dates all the way back to the time of the Soviet Union and was supposed to become a major computing and analytics center for the Navy of the USSR. We say supposed to because the sad reality is that the building was never finished. You can tell that from the rooftops of the auxiliary buildings, where locator plates have been laid for radar facilities that were never added. Because of that, they're just strange round buildings with holes in the roof, impossible to identify if you don't know the story behind them. This vast set of structures was supposed to include a power unit, a medical unit, a canteen, and even a dorm for the staff when they needed to stay on site overnight. Unfortunately, the buildings are little more than shells, and nobody ever stayed there. The equipment that was to be housed in the buildings was already obsolete when construction work began in 1986, because large computers had been replaced by smaller desktops. The collapse of the Soviet Union a few years later put a permanent end to the project. Smith Mansion in Cody, Wyoming, USA isn't really much of a mansion. It's more like a glorified log cabin, built in a psychedelic style and balanced precariously on the top of a small hill. Everything you see at the site is the work of just one man, working alone over a period of many years. Legend has it that it's built directly on top of an old mine shaft, although that's thought to be nothing more than local folklore. The property was built by Lee Smith, a former builder and engineer who'd always dreamed of creating a home for himself with his own two hands. His original plan was to make a log cabin house for himself and his family, but he got carried away. His obsession with the project led to his wife divorcing him, after which Lee carried on building. He added staircases that went nowhere, balconies that couldn't be accessed from the interior, and secret rooms. The story has a tragic twist to it. Lee never secured himself to the property when he was working at height, and eventually suffered a fatal fall while adding more height to one of the towers. The property is now in the hands of a new owner, who may turn it into a museum. There's something a little ominous about L'Île de la Sorcellerie in Thann, France. That's because its name translates into English as the Eye of the Witch. It's not difficult to understand how it came about that nickname. The eye-like circle is just about all that remains of this stone ruin, which was once a castle. To be more specific, it was Engelberg Castle, built by Count Frederick II in 1224 as a defensive fortress to watch over the Thur Valley. The castle stood tall for over 400 years, but became a victim of the infamous 30-Year War that erupted between Europe's Catholics and Protestants in 1618. Vast swaths of Europe's castles and ancient buildings were sacked and destroyed during the battle. And although Engelberg Castle wasn't totally destroyed, it was badly damaged. Deciding that it couldn't be saved, King Louis XIV ordered the castle to be destroyed in 1673. His obedient followers tore down the walls and burned the great halls that once stood at the site, leaving only the eye to look out across the valley. You'll have to forgive Petrova Gorva in Malika, Croatia, for its current appearance. It's not looking its best at the moment. It was once a far more impressive building, but the giant steel sculpture has been picked apart to the extent that it's barely more than a concrete skeleton. It's a little shocking that the building has been savagely torn apart like this. It was built as a memorial to the Croatian victims of the Second World War. Apparently, the Croats aren't big on sentiment. They saw the towering monument as nothing more than a convenient source of scrap metal and scavenged the building material for their own purposes. Petrova Gorva was built in 1981 by architect Vojin Bakic as an iconic 12-story high creation on a mountaintop. Beneath the structure is a network of tunnels and chambers that were used as field hospitals during the war, and then later as a meeting place for Yugoslavian communists. Normally, the government would step in to protect a monument like this, but apparently Vojin erected his work without the proper planning permissions and consents, making his well-intentioned memorial fair game to thieves. A very long time ago, the site of Sarmi Zagatusa Reggia in Kosteci, Romania, was the capital of the mighty Dacian kingdom. You'd never guess that from looking at it today. So little of the original city remains today that it looks more like an old stone churchyard. We can thank the Romans for that. When they came here in the early years of the 1st century, they destroyed everything they found at the site and created their own city a few miles away, from which they ruled their newly seized territory. It wasn't until 1900 years later, in the 20th century, that the shattered pieces of the old city were noticed by archaeologists. We don't blame the archaeologists for that. Sarmi Zagatusa Reggia is tucked away in the Carpathian Mountains, 4,000 feet above ground level, and is extremely difficult to reach by foot even today. It had been the Dacian capital for a little over a century at the time the Romans came to wreck it, and was also the home of legendary Dacian ruler King Decibel. The 6 citadels that once stood here must have been an incredible sight, but the Romans tore down the walls and let nature take its course in reclaiming the rest of the area. When the bunkers of Palinja in Vuolahti, Finland were first built, the idea was that they'd be able to stand up to an attack by the Soviet Union. That attack never came. In fact, the only thing that's ever attacked these bunkers are the combined forces of time and nature, and it's a battle that the structures are losing badly. Tensions between Finland and the USSR were high during the early 1940s, with the Finnish fearing the Soviets wanted to make their country the latest addition to their ever-expanding territory. That fear saw the creation of over 700 concrete or rock fortifications across the country's eastern border, making up the Salpa Line. Salpalinja is what the structures are called in the native Finnish tongue. The fortifications cover a distance of almost 750 miles, starting in the Gulf of Finland and reaching as far as Pechenski, which is now in Russia. It took the Finns only 4 years to complete their work, which is an impressive accomplishment, but it was never tested in battle. Perhaps their presence alone was enough to deter the Soviets from the idea of invading. It might be a little unfair to describe the Blue Ghost Tunnel of Thorold, Ontario, Canada as abandoned. Chances are you'll find a few people at the location on any day you decide to pay it a visit. But all of those people would be fans of the paranormal hoping to see a ghost. In terms of its original function, the tunnel has been abandoned for more than a century. The railway tunnel was almost obsolete by the time it was built 140 years ago, and was shut down just 40 years after it was completed because a more modern double-swing bridge was built nearby as a replacement. It's been left alone for so long that even the former canal that it runs beneath has dried up. Without anyone to maintain the old tunnel, the dampness from the old canal has broken through the roof. The floors are muddy, the timbers look rotten, and the sound of dripping follows you everywhere you go. Legend has it that the drips aren't the only thing that follows you around in the dark, though. The tunnel is freezing cold even on the warmest days of the summer, and is said to be the most haunted place in Canada. If we told you there was an abandoned treehouse in Taiwan, you probably wouldn't care very much. After all, what's so special about a treehouse? Well, in the case of Anping Treehouse in Tian'an City, it didn't start out as a treehouse at all. It used to be a warehouse. But since its abandonment, the roots of a banyan tree have grown through every inch of its walls, ceilings, and floors like something out of a horror movie. If you peer through the tree roots, you'll find a few scraps of signage and masonry that identify this place as the former premises of the British Tite & Co. Trading Company, built during the 19th century. Nature has destroyed so much of the building that what little of it remains is likely being held together by the tree. If the roots were cut away, the warehouse would collapse into rubble. In some places, the roots have taken the shape of the doors and windows they used to cover, giving the impression that the structures are still there, even though they crumbled to dust years ago. Once upon a time, fire towers were a common sight in the United States of America. Very few of them remain standing today, which means that the so-called Guardian of the Gulch in Helena, Montana, is one of the last of a dying breed. Helena used to have multiple fire towers, all of which were made of wood, as this one is. Now, this is one of just 5 left in all of the USA, and it's by far and away the best preserved. Helena had a big problem with fire during the 19th century. Most of the residential homes were made from wood, and they were built too close together. When one house caught fire, they all did. After one especially bad fire outbreak during the 1870s, the Guardian of the Gulch was built as a safeguard against future problems. The city authorities ensured that there would be someone sat at the top of the 25-foot tall tower every hour of every day, and if they saw a fire on the horizon, they would ring the bell to alert the fire service. The invention of phones and fire trucks made towers like this unnecessary, and so it's been abandoned for over a century. Ironically enough, during that time, it's caught fire more than once itself, although fortunately the rickety structure survived the incidents. The official name of this unusual site in the desert of Qatar is the Al-Wukair Scrapyard, but we think that name is misleading. The word scrapyard suggests that items left at this site are scrapped. We don't see any sign of scrappage going on here. Instead, we see a collection of more than 20,000 motor vehicles, all of which are covered in thick layers of white sand and dust. It looks like a post-apocalyptic wasteland, which makes it all the more remarkable that it's just 12 miles away from the busy center of the city of Doha. Every type of road vehicle you could imagine can be found here, from buses and excavators to cement mixers and cranes, right down to motorbikes and 3-wheeled cars. Some are very old, whereas others appear to be almost brand new. All of the vehicles are said to have been seized because of misdemeanors by their owners, ranging from unpaid loans and parking charges to criminal offenses. Once a year, an auction is held, during which the most valuable vehicles on the lot are sold off to the highest bidder. As for the rest, well, maybe they'll finally get around to scrapping them one day. We're heading back to Croatia now and visiting the city of Šibenik on the Adriatic coast. That's where we'll find the supposedly impenetrable structure known as the Fortress of St. Nicholas. We don't mean to disparage its reputation, but we don't think St. Nicholas Fortress is actually all that impenetrable. If it were, we wouldn't be able to show you so many great images of its interior taken by urban explorers. The arrow-shaped fortress was built by the Venetians during the 16th century as a safeguard against attacks by Turkish forces. The builders rendered the structure out of stone and brick, connected it to the mainland through a narrow walkway, and armed it with 32 cannons. Back when it was armed, it looked so intimidating that nobody even dared to try attacking it, and so it remained in service as an active deterrent for over 400 years until 1979, when the military finally decided it was obsolete. These days, anyone is welcome to approach it by boat and squeeze their way in through the narrow entrance, but it's probably a better idea to take the official tour and avoid the risk of injury. The Gavric Memorial Park in Bihać, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a Second World War memorial that's been treated with more respect than Petrova Gorva in Croatia, but not by much. It hasn't been deliberately destroyed, but it has been left to crumble and fall apart after many years of neglect. Yugoslav architect Bogdan Bogdanovic erected this arrangement of blocks and columns, engraved with traditional Yugoslav folk art in 1981. His intention was to mark the site of a series of mass executions that claimed the lives of thousands of Serbian and Jewish residents of Bihać during 1941. Unfortunately for him, and for the region, civil tensions in Yugoslavia erupted into violence during the 1990s, which led to the dissolution of the country and the desecration of the memorial. Some of the stones were smashed, whereas others are daubed with unsavory graffiti. Since then, the existence of the park appears to have been forgotten even by the people who live close to it, with not so much as an occasional bunch of flowers left here as a mark of respect. Perhaps we should pay more attention to the message written in stone at the park's entrance, which reads, "Life is stronger than death. Justice is stronger than crime. Love is stronger than hate." Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.